I stood there in the lobby of the most exclusive restaurant in downtown Chicago on New Year's Eve. The billionaire CEO who had graced the cover of Fortune 3 times running, being told there was no table for me. The maitre d' gave me an apologetic look and said he was sorry, but they were fully booked. All around me, champagne glasses clinked, couples held each other close, and families laughed together. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to be and someone to hold. I turned toward the exit when a movement caught my eye. A black man at a corner table near the window rose from his seat. Beside him, a little girl with braided hair looked up. He met my gaze and waved me over. A total stranger was inviting me to stay. That same day, I had wrapped up a conference call with investors in Singapore, London, and Sao Paulo. I had closed a $2 billion acquisition without ever raising my voice. My name commanded respect in boardrooms across 4 continents. Yet here I was in the lobby of Chicago's most coveted dining spot, being told none of that mattered. I kept my voice steady and told the maitre d' I would pay triple, even 4 times the price. Name your number. He shook his head, silver temples catching the light, and said he wished he could help, but every table was reserved. It was New Year's Eve. Of course I knew that. What I hadn't expected was that the same restaurant where I had hosted countless business dinners, the place where the staff knew exactly how I liked my sparkling water, would have no room for me on the one night I showed up alone. My assistant had left early to catch a flight home to Milwaukee. My driver had asked for the holiday off weeks earlier, and I had approved it without a second thought. I owned a penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lincoln Park, a wine collection worth more than most people's homes, and not a single soul expecting me anywhere. So I had driven myself. For the first time in years, I slid behind the wheel of my sleek black Mercedes, one I barely remembered buying, and navigated the holiday traffic like anyone else. I told myself it was an adventure, a nice change of pace. I never admitted it was loneliness. That word simply did not exist in my world. I thanked the maitre d' and turned away. My reflection stared back from the polished marble walls, immaculate makeup, a charcoal cashmere coat that cost more than most monthly salaries, perfect posture. I walked toward the exit, heels clicking with measured precision. The restaurant hummed with life. An older couple holding hands across a candlelit table, a young family laughing over shared pasta, friends raising glasses in a toast. I was surrounded by warmth, yet I felt completely alone. The thought rose up and I pushed it down the way I always did. I had built my company from nothing. I had appeared on the covers of Forbes, Fortune, and Time. I answered to no one and needed no one. Still, when I reached the door, I allowed myself one last glance back. That was when I saw him. I learned later that Andre Hayes had not planned to come here that night. Years earlier, this restaurant had been his and Jasmine's special place, not for regular dinners they could never afford, but for the moments that mattered. Their 5th anniversary, the night they learned she was pregnant with Nia. New Year's Eve dinners where they would dress up, splurge on the tasting menu, and pretend for one evening. They lived that kind of life all the time. The last time they sat here together, Jasmine had been in remission. They toasted with champagne and hope, believing the worst was behind them. Just months later, she was gone. He had avoided the place ever since. Too many ghosts, too much of her in every corner. But Nia had asked. His 7-year-old daughter, who remembered her mother only in fragments, a laugh, a lullaby, the scent of lavender lotion, had looked up at him with those big brown eyes and said she wanted to go to Mommy's special restaurant so they would still remember. How could he say no? So there they were at the corner table by the window, the same spot he and Jasmine had always chosen. Nia wore her favorite purple dress dotted with tiny silver stars. In her lap, she held a drawing she had made that afternoon. 3 stick figures holding hands, Andre on the left, Nia in the middle, and Jasmine floating on a cloud above them with a halo of yellow crayon around her head. Nia pointed across the room and told her dad the lady looked sad. Andre followed her gaze and saw me speaking with the maitre d'. Even from a distance, he could read the tension in my shoulders. Nia insisted I was the kind of sad where you smile but your eyes don't. When I turned and started toward the door, she said softly that I didn't have anyone waiting for me. The words hit Andre hard. He looked at the empty chair beside him, the one he still couldn't bring himself to fill, and then back at me heading into the cold Chicago night. Jasmine would have done something. His wife had never been able to walk past someone in need. Before he could talk himself out of it, Andre stood up. My hand was already on the door when I heard a small voice cut through the noise. "Excuse me, lady." I turned. The little girl with braided hair was standing on her chair waving at me. Beside her, the man was on his feet, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. "They had an extra chair," she called out. "I could sit with them." The maitre d' looked mortified and started to apologize, but I heard myself say it was fine. I didn't know why. Every instinct told me to decline gracefully and leave. I was Brooke Ellison. I did not accept charity from strangers. But the little girl kept smiling, and her father's face held no pity, no recognition of who I was or what I was worth. Just a quiet steadiness, as if he understood something about me I hadn't said aloud. I walked over. He introduced himself as Andre, and this was his daughter Nia, who proudly announced she was 7 and told me I was really pretty. Did I happen to be a princess? Despite myself, I felt my lips curve into a smile. I said no, I wasn't a princess. Nia shrugged and said princesses were boring anyway because they just waited in towers. I looked like someone who did stuff. Andre pulled out the chair across from him. I hesitated. I could still thank them and walk out into the night where no one would see my vulnerability. I could go back to my empty penthouse, pour a glass of wine, and pretend none of this had happened. Or I could sit down. I thought about the conference call, the billions on the line, the investors hanging on every word. I thought about my assistant flying home to family who missed her, my driver spending the holiday with people who loved him. I thought about every New Year's Eve for the past decade spent at parties where everyone wanted something from me and I was never just Brooke. I was always the CEO, the billionaire, the brand. I sat down. I thanked them and the words felt strange in my mouth. When was the last time I had thanked someone and truly meant it? Nia beamed. Andre nodded and asked the waiter for another menu. Just like that, I found myself at a tiny table with a stranger and his 7-year-old daughter. No agenda, no power, no role to play. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I had no idea what came next. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, something in my chest loosened, just a little, just enough to breathe. The dinner that followed was nothing like any meal I had experienced in years. I was used to every lunch, every dinner, every glass of wine coming with an agenda. But Andre asked me nothing about my company. He never mentioned my net worth or my latest acquisition. When Nia asked what I did for work, he simply said I helped run a big business and left it at that. Instead, we talked about small things, Nia's favorite subject in school, art because math was too bossy with all its rules, the snow that was supposed to fall before midnight, the best flavor of ice cream. Nia insisted on strawberry, Andre argued for butter pecan, and I admitted I couldn't remember the last time I had eaten ice cream at all. Nia declared that the saddest thing she had ever heard and told her dad they had to fix it. Andre smiled, the first real smile I had seen from him, and it softened the careful reserve he wore like armor. He suggested maybe we could get dessert later. I found myself watching them, studying the easy rhythm between father and daughter. The way he cut her food into smaller pieces without being asked, the way she reached for his hand when she laughed, as if joy was something meant to be shared through touch. The way he listened to her, giving her his full attention like her 7-year-old observations mattered as much as any boardroom presentation. This was what family looked like. Not the cold silence of my own childhood where achievements were expected and affection was rationed, not the performative warmth of holiday parties where everyone smiled for the cameras and went home to separate lives. This was real. Suddenly, Nia caught me staring and asked if she had food on her face. I laughed softly and told her no, I was just thinking about how nice this was, having dinner with them. She beamed and told her dad she had been right. I was nice and he had been worried for nothing. Andre's expression flickered, but he gently reminded her not to pry. I assured him it was all right. I would have been cautious too if a stranger joined my table. I met his eyes and thanked him again for letting me stay. He held my gaze and said everyone deserves somewhere to be on New Year's Eve. The simple words landed deep in my chest. Before I could respond, Nia tugged my sleeve and asked if I had pets. She wanted a dog, but her dad said their apartment was too small. Did I have a big apartment? I could get a really big, fluffy dog that looked like a cloud. I almost laughed and told her I didn't have any pets because I traveled a lot for work and wouldn't have time to take care of them properly. Nia considered this with the gravity of a judge and said it was sad, but at least I was honest. Some people got pets and then ignored them, and that was worse. Andre said dryly that Nia had very strong opinions about responsibility. She shot back that someone had to. Then she asked my favorite color. No one had asked me that in decades. I answered ocean blue, the color of the sea on a calm day. She said hers was purple, obviously, gesturing at her dress, and then grew thoughtful. She asked if I cried a lot. Andre gently warned her that was personal, but I told her it was okay. I admitted I didn't cry much, that sometimes I wanted to but couldn't. Nia nodded solemnly and said her mom used to tell grown-ups who didn't cry that they were holding their sadness inside. And if you didn't let it out, it stayed stuck in your chest forever. She added that her mom cried sometimes because it was like rain for the heart. It washed things clean. I didn't know what to say. I looked at Andre, at the grief still etched in the lines around his eyes, and then back at this remarkable child who spoke about her mother with such simple wisdom. I told her her mom sounded very wise. Andre's voice grew quiet as he agreed she really was. When midnight came, the restaurant erupted in cheers. Champagne corks popped, strangers embraced, and somewhere a jazz band played the opening notes of Auld Lang Syne. Nia stood on her chair and threw her arms around her dad's neck, wishing him a happy new year. He held her tight, eyes closed, and I saw grief and love tangled together so tightly they had become the same thing. Then she turned and hugged me, too, brief and fierce, the way only children hug without reservation. When she pulled back, my throat felt tight. I managed a happy new year. Andre reached across the table and took my hand. His palm was warm, his grip steady. In that suspended moment, as the old year died and the new one began, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Hope. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a strange, beautiful accident that couldn't happen again. But a few days into January, I found myself walking through Lincoln Park on my lunch break, something I never did, and there they were. Andre was pushing Nia on a swing, both of them bundled against the cold, their laughter carrying across the frozen air. Nia spotted me first and called my name. There was no graceful way to pretend I hadn't seen them, and honestly, I didn't want to. I said hello. Andre looked surprised but not displeased. I gestured vaguely at the park and said I was out for a walk, something I didn't do often. He told me I should. Fresh air was good for the soul. Nia jumped off the swing and demanded I push her because her dad's arms were getting tired. Somehow I, who had meetings to attend and an empire to run, spent the next hour in the playground, pushing a 7-year-old on a swing and learning the proper technique for building a snowball. It became a pattern. Coffee runs that accidentally coincided with Andre's schedule, weekend afternoons in the park when Nia had no school, dinners that started casual and turned into something I looked forward to all week. I learned about him in pieces. He worked as an education consultant for community programs, helping at-risk youth find paths to college and careers. He had met Jasmine in graduate school when they were both broke and idealistic, certain they could change the world. After she died, he had considered moving back to Dallas where his mother lived, but Nia begged to stay in the city where her memories of mommy still lived. He didn't ask much about my past, but he listened when I offered fragments. The childhood in Connecticut with manicured lawns and absent parents. The company I had built from a small tech startup into a global giant. The way success had become a golden trap I fastened around my own wrists. One evening while Nia napped on the couch and we sat in his small kitchen drinking tea, he asked if I regretted building what I built. I considered the question and told him I regretted what it had cost me, but I didn't know if I could have been anyone else. Andre nodded slowly and said he used to think the same about grief, that it had to consume everything and leave no room for anything else. Now he thought maybe there was room, if he was brave enough to make it. The first time I overstepped, I didn't even realize it. Nia had mentioned wanting art supplies, the really good kind, not the ones from the regular store. That weekend, I showed up at their apartment with a professional grade set worth more than $500, brushes made from imported sable hair, pigments used by gallery artists, a wooden case with brass hinges. Nia's eyes went wide. Andre's expression went carefully neutral. He thanked me for the generosity, but later pulled me aside and said I didn't have to do that. I told him I just wanted her to have something nice. He explained gently but firmly that the set cost more than his grocery budget for 2 months. Nia didn't need expensive things. She needed consistency and presence, things that couldn't be bought. The words stung more than they should have. I nodded stiffly and apologized. He softened and asked me to keep things simple. They weren't a project to be funded, they were just people. I agreed. I meant it. But old habits were harder to break than I expected. When Andre mentioned funding for one of his community programs had been cut, I casually offered to cover the shortfall. When Nia's school sent home a flyer about an elite art camp, I researched the application and started drafting a recommendation letter. When his laptop died mid-project, a new one arrived at his door the next day with a note saying I was just returning the favor for New Year's Eve. Each gesture came from a good place. Each one pushed him further away. One evening, he stood in his doorway with the sealed laptop box and told me he couldn't accept it. I insisted it was a tool for his work. He helped kids find futures and shouldn't be held back by outdated equipment. His jaw tightened. The point, he said, was that he hadn't asked for it. Every time I helped, it felt like I was trying to fix them, like they were broken and I was the one with the tools. I felt heat rise to my cheeks and told him that wasn't fair. I cared about both of them. He ran a hand over his face, exhaustion replacing anger, and said he had spent his whole life proving he didn't need handouts. When I swooped in with money and connections, it made him feel like none of that mattered, like he wasn't enough on his own. The silence stretched tight. I admitted quietly that I hadn't thought about how it would feel to him. I only thought about what I could give. Andre's expression softened with something like recognition. He said he knew, but that was the problem. I was so used to giving things that I didn't know how to just be. I had no response because he was right. I tried to change. I stopped offering money, stopped buying gifts, stopped solving problems that weren't mine. I learned to sit with Nia and simply color without suggesting better techniques or premium paper. I learned to listen to Andre talk about his work without proposing funding solutions or corporate partnerships. It was harder than any negotiation I had ever conducted. Every instinct screamed at me to contribute, to add value, to justify my presence. Sitting still felt like failure. But slowly something shifted. One evening, Andre looked at me across his kitchen table and said, "This was nice. Just this." And I realized for the first time in my life I was learning that being present was enough. The photo appeared on a gossip site in early March. Me and Andre in the park, Nia between us, all three of us laughing at something off camera. The headline called it a tech billionaire's secret romance. The comments were predictable. A few turned ugly, questioning why a woman like me would be seen with a black man from the South Side, using language that made my stomach turn. I had my PR team scrub the article within hours and threatened legal action against the photographer, but the damage was done. Andre withdrew. He still responded to my texts and agreed to see me, but something had shifted behind his eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. He told me one night after Nia had gone to bed that he didn't want her dragged into my world. She had been through enough. I said I was handling it. He replied that I couldn't handle everything. Some things just had to be weathered. I wanted to argue that I could protect them, that my resources could build walls around this fragile thing we were creating. But I saw the look on his face and held my tongue. For once, I listened instead of acted. It wasn't enough. In April, the school called Andre in. Nia's application for a prestigious art scholarship, one he had never submitted, had been flagged for review. The admissions director wanted to discuss the glowing recommendation letter signed by me. Andre called that night, voice like ice. I had gone behind his back. I tried to explain that the school had the best art program in the city and Nia had so much talent. He reminded me he had said no, that he had told me he didn't want my connections involved in her education, and I had looked him in the eye and agreed. His words cut like broken glass. He asked if I thought my money and influence gave me the right to make decisions for them like they were children who didn't know what was good for them. I begged him to let me explain. He said I couldn't help myself. Old habits died hard. He had heard that before from people who always thought they knew better than the single black father from the South Side. He hadn't expected it from me. Tears pricked my eyes. I couldn't remember the last time I had cried. I told him I had made a terrible mistake, but I did it because I cared. His voice cracked as he said he knew I cared, but caring wasn't enough if I couldn't respect boundaries or trust him to know what was right for his own daughter. He needed time and asked me to stay away from Nia. She was already asking about me and he didn't want her hurt worse. He asked me to give them space. The line went dead. I sat in my penthouse surrounded by everything money could buy and felt the foundation of something precious crumble beneath my feet. I had done this with the best intentions. I had done exactly what I had always done. Tried to control, tried to fix, tried to prove my worth through action rather than simply being. Now the only people who had ever seen me as more than a CEO were slipping away. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had built a career on understanding what people needed and solving problems before they escalated. Yet when it came to genuine human connection, I had failed in the most fundamental way. I had treated love like a transaction, and now I was paying the price. The weeks that followed were the longest of my life. I didn't call Andre, didn't text, didn't drive past his apartment on the south side or show up at the park where Nia liked to swing. He had asked for space, and for once I gave someone exactly what they asked for instead of what I thought they needed. The silence was deafening. I threw myself into work the way I always had when life became too complicated. Board meetings, acquisitions, the endless machinery of empire. My executives noticed nothing different. My shareholders saw the same decisive leader they had always trusted, the mask held. At night, the questions came. If I couldn't use my money, my connections, my ability to solve problems, what was left? Who was Brooke Ellison without the power to fix things? I had built my entire identity around being useful, around being the one with answers. Strip that away, and what remained? The question haunted me through sleepless nights and distracted days. Slowly, painfully, an answer began to form. I started volunteering, not at Andre's community programs. I would not insert myself into his world uninvited. Instead, I found a youth literacy center on the west side. A struggling organization with outdated books and dedicated staff who couldn't afford to pay themselves living wages. I showed up one Tuesday evening wearing jeans and a sweater instead of my usual designer armor and asked if they needed help. The director, a tired woman named Martha, who had clearly never heard of me, handed me a stack of picture books and pointed toward a circle of fidgeting 6-year-olds. She told me to read to them and keep them engaged. No strategic planning, no funding proposals, just a plastic chair, a worn copy of Where the Wild Things Are, and 8 pairs of skeptical eyes. I was terrible at it. I read too fast, forgot to show the pictures, and didn't know how to do funny voices. One boy fell asleep. A girl with pink barrettes informed me the last volunteer had been way better. But I came back the next week and the week after that. I learned to slow down, to let the children interrupt with questions, to laugh when I mispronounced words and let them correct me. I learned that showing up was its own kind of gift, one that couldn't be outsourced or purchased. I learned finally what Andre had been trying to tell me all along. Andre saw the change before he was ready to acknowledge it. A mutual acquaintance mentioned spotting me at the literacy center. A colleague shared an article about how the tech billionaire had been quietly volunteering for months without any press coverage or tax-deductible fanfare. He told himself it didn't matter. People didn't change. But Nia wouldn't let him forget. She asked at breakfast when I was coming back, wondered at dinner if I was mad at her, and announced at bedtime that she wanted to show me her new painting, the one she had made with the expensive brushes still sitting in their wooden case. One night in September, as Andre tucked her into bed, Nia handed him a new drawing. 4 figures this time, Andre on the left, tall and steady, Nia in the middle, grinning in purple crayon, Jasmine floating on a cloud above them with the same yellow halo. And beside Andre, holding his hand, stood a woman with brown hair and a blue dress. Nia pointed and said that was me because I made him smile, and Mommy was on the cloud so she could see that they were happy. Andre stared at the drawing. His daughter had seen something he had been refusing to admit. His resistance wasn't just about protecting Nia, it was about protecting himself from hope, from the possibility of losing someone again. Nia's small voice asked if Mommy would want him to be happy. He pulled her into a hug and told her yes, baby, she would. That night, after Nia was asleep, Andre sat alone in the kitchen with the drawing spread before him. He thought about Jasmine, not just the grief he had wrapped around her memory like a shield. She had loved fiercely and forgiven freely. She had believed people deserved second chances. Near the end, she had told him her only fear wasn't dying, it was that he would stop living. He had promised her he wouldn't, but for years, he had hidden behind his role as Nia's protector and convinced himself that keeping everyone at arm's length was the same as keeping his daughter safe. He had turned Jasmine's memory into a wall instead of a window. I had made mistakes, real ones, but I was trying to change. Not to win him back, but because I had finally understood something true about myself. He had watched me stumble toward that truth with the same determination I brought to boardrooms. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't perfect, but it was real. The letter arrived on a gray October morning. Andre recognized my handwriting on the envelope, precise, elegant, unmistakably mine. He considered throwing it away unopened. Instead, he sat down at the kitchen table and read. I wrote that I wasn't asking for another chance. I knew I didn't deserve one, and even if I did, that wasn't mine to ask for. I just wanted him to know he had been right about everything. I had spent my whole life believing my worth came from what I could give. Money, solutions, success, and he had shown me that presence mattered more than presence, that listening was harder than fixing, that love wasn't a transaction. I was still learning. I volunteered now at the literacy center on the west side. The kids there didn't care that I was a CEO, they cared whether I remembered to do the funny voices. It was humbling in the best possible way. I thanked him for New Year's Eve, for letting me sit at their table when I had nowhere else to go, for showing me what family looked like. I would carry that gift with me always. Whatever happened, I hoped he and Nia found everything they deserved. Andre read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully, placed it in his desk drawer, and did nothing. But he found himself thinking about me at odd moments, wondering if I was still reading to those kids, hoping I had learned to do the voices right. He called me in November. I didn't answer, so he left a message saying he had gotten my letter. He wasn't ready for anything, but Nia asked about me, and he didn't want her growing up thinking people couldn't change or that mistakes were permanent. Maybe we could talk, just talk, no promises. I called him back the next day. We met for coffee at a neutral spot, not the park, not the restaurant, just 2 people sitting across a small table trying to find our way back to honesty. I told him I wasn't the same person I had been in April. I knew that sounded like something people say, but I had been doing the real work, the kind that didn't show up on a balance sheet. Andre nodded slowly and said he had been doing some work too, realizing he had used his grief as an excuse to keep everyone out, including people who might be worth letting in. We didn't solve everything that day, but we started. 1 year later, New Year's Eve returned. No exclusive Chicago restaurant this time, no velvet ropes or champagne towers, just Andre's small apartment on the south side, the same one where I had once dropped off a laptop I shouldn't have bought. Nia sprawled on the living room floor with her watercolors, working on a painting she refused to let anyone see until it was finished. Andre stood at the stove stirring a pot of soup that had been his mother's recipe, and I set the table. I was clumsy at it. The forks ended up on the wrong side, the napkins folded unevenly. But I was there doing something small and ordinary, and nobody was keeping score. On the shelf behind the couch, a framed photograph of Jasmine smiled at the room. I had asked Andre about it once early in our reconciliation, whether it bothered him having her picture there while I was present. He had said simply that she was part of this family and always would be. I wasn't replacing anyone, I was just adding to the story. As the clock ticked toward midnight, Nia abandoned her painting and scrambled onto the couch between us. We counted down together. Outside, fireworks began to crackle over the city. Inside, the apartment glowed warm and golden. When we reached one, Nia threw her arms around both of us at once, pulling us into a messy, laughing embrace. And I, who had spent decades measuring my worth in acquisitions and headlines and the cold certainty of control, felt something I had never expected to find. Enough. Not because I had earned it, not because I had bought it, but because I had finally learned to simply be present, imperfect, and uncertain in a room with people who accepted me anyway. I didn't know what the new year would bring. I didn't know if this fragile, precious thing would last a month or a lifetime. But for the first time, I didn't need to know. I just needed to be here. And I was. I never thought a simple wave from a stranger on New Year's Eve would rewrite everything I believed about success, love, and what it really means to matter. There I was, Brooke Ellison, the billionaire CEO who could close billion-dollar deals before breakfast, standing alone in that bustling Chicago restaurant while the whole world seemed to be celebrating with someone they loved. Andre and little Nia didn't see the empire or the headlines. They just saw a woman who needed a seat at the table. And in the months that followed, through my clumsy attempts to fix their lives with gifts and connections, I learned the hardest, most beautiful lesson of all. Real connection isn't about what you can give or solve. It's about showing up, listening without an agenda, and respecting the sacred space of someone else's heart. I had spent decades measuring my worth in boardrooms and bank accounts, only to discover that the deepest riches come from quiet evenings, coloring with a child who trusts you, from letting a man set boundaries that sting because they're honest, and from finally understanding that being present, imperfect, uncertain, and fully human is the greatest gift you can ever offer. That night, wrapped in their warmth, I felt something I'd chased my whole life but never caught. Enough. If this story stirred something in your soul, if it reminded you of the times you've learned to simply be there for someone instead of trying to rescue them, I'd love to hear it. Drop your own lesson in the comments below. And if these heartfelt stories move you, hit that subscribe button and join our family. You never know whose wave might change your life next.